All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second workshop of the Civic Working Group. First, the nitty-gritty. Restrooms are in the hall behind me at that end. And in terms of your parking validation, when you leave, you can sign out and get a validation at the, I did start it, at the desk where you checked in. So the Civic Working Group, which are the people you see before you, were appointed by City Council to run a community planning process to come up with the preferred uses and with fiscal backup for the future of the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium and its site. So we've been running since last December when we started meeting. We've been doing a research process that is focused on gathering information to present at these meetings so that the public can have all of the information that's available on the Civic Auditorium and give us the most informed and helpful direction on where they would like to see us go with the Civic. We will be having one more meeting after this one in March, where we will be looking at the results of this meeting, which is focused only on this building and the site, the city-owned property, and how it's going to be used and funded. At our next meeting, we'll kind of take it all and review all the information and talk about any other factors that people would like to see brought to council that are important to them. And we will make recommendations and bring them to council in May. So that next meeting again will be in March. So this meeting is a really exciting, cool thing that you're going to be introduced to. We have an amazing interactive tool that was created for us by MetroQuest, and it will enable you to not only to take the dreaming that you did at our last meeting and take it to the next step and tell us how you would like to see it funded. The choices for the Civic that you'll see in this software that you're going to be trained in today are based on what we got out of our first meeting. And the financial ramifications of those choices are based on real-life examples that our crack consultants team have uncovered for us. So our focus here today, again, is the land that the city owns and how we're going to use it. And I hope that you bring your best trade-off minds to work it all out in this software. And I give you John Alschuler.
Practice, I had a microphone. Is there one that we get attached here?
Is this attached?
Excuse us for 30 seconds of technical adjustment.
Maybe I'll take this opportunity to do a roll call. Do you guys have a list?
Ann has it.
Okay.
John, do you want to do that?
Linda Bozon, Phil Brock,
Here.
Fred Denny,
Here.
Nina Fresco,
Here.
Frank Gruber, Yao Katagiri,
Here.
Philip Oresco,
Here.
Jody Summers, and Kerry Upton.
Here. Well, thank you, Nina. And on behalf of myself and my colleagues, I want to thank the City Council for setting into motion this interesting and exciting process, and thank every member of the Civic Working Group. They've not only been good clients, they've been really great partners, and much of what you're going to see here is really myself and my colleagues putting into a form ideas that they've generated and thoughts that they've come up with The city is very fortunate to have them guiding and engaged in this process. Remy, why don't we just sort of walk through a few introductory slides. As Nina said, this is a second workshop here in a sequence of 3. Nina explained that very well, so we needn't dwell really on that. We're here today to talk about what is a very precious resource in a built environment like Santa Monica, land. Land is one of the most fundamentally precious commodities the city has to work with. And there are very few, maybe no other places in this incredibly interesting, complicated city where city government owns 10 acres, the dominant use of which is a parking lot. So the opportunity here is special not only because this building is special, because the history of this building is special, its architecture is special, but this site is special. And the fact that you have available to you this resource to chart its future gives all of you in this city an opportunity rarely to come again. You all are here partly because of the rich and fascinating history of this building. This is a place where the Oscars were held, where many of you, including myself, came to many, many concerts over many, many years. It's been not only a symbol of the city, it's been architecturally important, but the events that have gone on here, the times the community has come together, to celebrate, to enjoy, to exhilarate in the arts, is a special thing for a city and a special thing for this city. But we're here, as you all know, because the facility is now closed. It's a resource to nobody in the community other than as an architectural icon. It was closed because of 2 things. It's an old facility. It's 56 years old. Like any building, particularly a complicated performing arts center in an environment where technology has moved very rapidly. The facility is out of date. It's seismically unsafe. It can't be occupied by significant numbers of people. It just would simply be too risky. And it's expensive to operate. So the city council made a judgment that the drain on your tax dollars and the competition for other important priorities was simply too significant. So the city council made the judgment to close it. So we're here now to think about its future. Now, to me, of all the slides that I'm going to do, this to me is my favorite. What's special about Santa Monica, you can see in this figure ground, is this very intimate collection of small blocks where, you know, houses, shops, stores come together in this very elegant, very simple, straightforward pattern, which is the character of neighborhood life. And in the middle of it, you see, is these collection of 5 or 6 big super blocks, which is a very un-Santa Monica form. You see it at the airport, you'll see it at the community college, but you see it in very, very few places in the city. And the large footprint of Rand, the Civic Center complex, this complex itself breaks that pattern. And along with the really massive cut that the freeway did, really separates the downtown. And so much of this city is a small, intimate walking scale where people move from neighborhood to neighborhood. Here, we have this gash down the center and the isolation enhanced by these super blocks. And one of the opportunities you have as citizens is to figure out if we can reinstitute some of the intimate scale of Santa Monica with blocks and streets and character and open spaces into this large parking lot superblock format. And the city's made enormous strides in addressing this area of the city in the last 10 years. The park, the new development by Rand, Civic Center Village, Ken Genzer Square, and we're all going to be affected dramatically by the introduction of the Expo line termination or beginning, depending how you want to look at it, which is literally a 5-minute walk from where we are today. And the introduction of transit for the first time in Santa Monica's history into its downtown will have very, very profound implications for generations to come, as it has everywhere in the country where this has occurred, on land use and how people experience it. So that gets us to our site and your opportunity today, which is to take this once every 50 or 60 year opportunity to think about how it could be reimagined. How can this place be brought back to life? How can this building be brought back to life? How can this site get reintegrated back into the community so it serves the arts, it serves citizens, it serves the city, and it replicates an urban form that's part of what makes this city so special. And there's so many things that could happen here. This is one of the greatest, richest resources of arts and culture in all of Los Angeles and, frankly, of anywhere in the United States. And this building and what happens around this site can do more than just park cars to enhance and promote the arts and really make Santa Monica, for the long term, a place where the arts are practiced, come alive, engage citizens, and enrich civic life. Now, there are consequences. You bring people together. They come most often today in cars. Traffic is an inevitable consequence, and things like that have to be considered. There's virtually anything is taller than a parking lot. So the built form will get larger if there's anything there at all. And there'll be more density. Now, some of this can produce money. The city, because of the end of redevelopment, as an act of your governor and your state legislature, took away the tool that was going to be used to pay for this building. So part of the challenge, and what's really, I think, most interesting today, is the tension that all of civic life is built on, which is first deciding what you want and then figuring out how you're going to pay for it. And if we lived in a world that doesn't exist, where there were unlimited resources with no consequences, this would be an imaginary process, but none of you live in that world in your personal lives, and you don't live in that world in your civic life. That which you imagine and that which you want has to be paid for with that which you have. And so we have to figure out this interesting combination of imagining something that can be a place you all love with activities you want to be in and participate in, with financial resources that are real and your city can afford, and your city council feels comfortable allocating those resources. So that's what this is about. Today is about really one large thing, which is trying to come up with a balance. What do you want, and how does it get paid for? Now, there's some constraints here. Again, the goal of this is to take you all as seriously as you all deserve to be taken, which is to give you the tools to exercise civic leadership. And those tools have constraints. Some are pretty obvious. There's only 10 acres. We can't have a plan that needs 12 acres. Right? You only have 10. So constraint one is you can only use the land you have. We can't make new land. Secondly, even with transit, this is an area which requires automobiles to move around. Can't bring people to a site without a place for them to park. Then we get to money. It costs money to build things. It costs money to renovate this building. You'll see some numbers. And secondly, the arts are, because of their wonder, because of their joy, because of what they represent, are virtually never a profit-making activity that requires a subsidy. And some facilities use Broadway shows or special events to offset it, but most facilities have a hard time operating at break even or a profit. So you've got what does it cost to build, And then how do I pay to keep it running? And then finally, in many ways, the most interesting question, if this really is going to be a cultural campus, that's not just one building. And even when this building was at its prime, and even when it was most engaged, it was used mostly for a short period of time at night. And you go to the interesting performing arts centers around the United States, and they really have about 2 good hours, maybe 3, you know? The hour, hour and a half when people are coming in, hour, hour and a half when people are going out. And that creates buzz and energy and excitement around them. Well, there are other arts uses that are engaged during the day. There are arts uses that bring people in smaller numbers with a constant flow and create a much more natural sort of daily life of the arts. So you have the big event use of something like the Civic paired with the smaller, more intimate, more regular scale of other kinds of art uses. And how does that come together in a critical mass? And the really interesting arts districts in the United States have really balanced these large events with medium-sized events, with smaller events that, you know, for school children and families and individual artists that create a whole network of arts use. So now, there are 2 things that we've said we can't move. There is this building, this historic landmark. It's here. That eats up land. And then the city's made a commitment to build the Early Childhood Education Center, and you see it in the corner here. That's also a given. Now I'm going to show you a series of hopefully not too mind-numbing charts. They all look like this, but each is different. What this is, having described you sort of what the vision is, what we're trying to do, these are the pieces of the puzzle. And what we've done with the Civic Working Group is say, okay, let's break this down and let's say, what are the choices? What are the ingredients that go into great placemaking here? And define them spatially. So the first list I'm showing you here is after you get rid of the 8 acres for the Civic, the building we're on, and the child, you've got 4.3 acres left. Now, what could go on it and how much land does it take? So we've given you a range of choices. Some are pretty teeny, you know, a small store or cafe. Some are more significant, you know, almost an acre, which would be a significant apartment building. So if you put, for example, 2 apartment buildings in a hotel, little open space, that's pretty much the whole site. So these are the physical tools, the physical choices you have available. Okay, you know, I'd like to go back. I'd like a restaurant, I'd like a store, I'd like an apartment building, and the tool you have will add up how many acres you're using. So again, you're not putting 12 acres of stuff on a 10-acre site. So these are the physical elements. Now, each of them have parking ramifications. One of the more technical, probably more boring aspects of all this, but it's real. You got a place to park all these cars, so the tool you have available to you will calculate how many parking spaces each use generates. Now, and these are the parking requirements of each of the uses. The good news is you don't have to figure this out. It's all wired into the machine and the software that you've got available to you. Then we get to the first of these big financial constraints I just mentioned. What's the capital cost? Like, what's the one-time building cost of this vision? We got 2 categories here in the arts. The first are 3 different visions, and Remy, who really is responsible for much of these things, much of this software, did a fabulous job for us, will explain the differences between these different visions of the arts. And then we've said there are a series of other arts activities that aren't here. Small music venues, rehearsal space, fine arts museum, some artist space, some education. What else would you like to add that could create this arts and cultural campus, more than just a single performance venue? And then we've said, okay, we have the capital cost. What's the cost to build each of these things? And then what's it cost to operate them? Because you can't build something and then keep it vacant. And these are the arts, requires a subsidy. So if we're going to build something, we have to operate it. That requires cash. So some have pretty significant operating deficits, over $3 million a year. Some have pretty minor operating deficits. And again, the good thing is the tool you have available is going to calculate all this for you. So you'll choose, like, okay, I'd like some artist space. I think a small music venue would be great. And I'd like a performing arts center here. And the tool will say, okay, this is how much the annual operating deficit's going to be. So the next thing is, now, where do I find the money? Step one is, what do I want to buy, right? What community, what cultural assets do you as a group, do you as individuals think should go here? What's your vision? What's your aspiration? What would be this special place for Santa Monica, this special place for the west side of Los Angeles? Now, one way, and there are a series of ways, but one way that could be paid for, in addition to your tax dollars, which are inherently constrained, is some of the land which is now a parking lot, the government owns, and it could lease it to a private developer, and they could build something. And if they built something, that would produce rent, and that rent could be used to refurbish the Civic Center or pay for its operating deficit. So we'd have some kind of essentially a self-financing system on the site. There'd be part of the site that uses money and part of the site that generates money. So I've described the portions of the site that use money, essentially the arts component. So now what this begins to show you is what are the financial consequences of putting things on the site that would make money. And you'll see here, this is how much you'd make from a small apartment house or immediate apartment building or larger apartment building. The hotels are clearly the most economically accretive. That's really not a real estate decision, that's as much a tax decision. Given the way the tax structure of the state of California works, hotels turn out to be just much more profitable for municipalities than some other forms of development. But this combines the tax increment with the land value, and it says, okay, I could get $50 million towards renovating the Civic if I built a hotel there. Or I would get $10 million if I would put an apartment building. So you'll have ways to spend money, and then you'll have ways to earn money. And then it all comes down at the end to these trade-offs. And each of you will have in your own mind the criteria. It's not for us, and one of the things I like about this process is it's not for me or the working group or anybody. It's for each of you to think through for yourself how you want to balance these things. That's why you're here. But one of the things we want you to think about when you're doing it is, well, how much land does each use take up? How much parking does it require? And really, to me, the most important question, this is just me, it may not be you, but for me, it's how do all of these come together to create a special place? What's the mix that 10 years from now, if you went there and said, wow, this is really a special place in Santa Monica. I'm really so proud of my government that it led to build this kind of a thing. What kind of a place are you trying to get? Now, the second is within that, what are the operating constraints? How do you pay for running it? How do you pay for the cultural uses? And then how do you pay for building it? So at the end, this is about what's your vision? How does it come together to create a special place that helps knit Santa Monica together, that gives it a place to celebrate the arts, that gives it a place that is much of the civic heart of the community? You know, Civic Center is not just a hypothetical term. It really should be the center of civic life. How do you do that? How do you pay for it? How do you operate it? So that's the big vision. And let me turn it over to my long-term colleague, Paul Silvern, who will describe the actual technicalities of how we're going to make all this work.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back for those of you who attended workshop number 1, and for those of you who weren't able to join us the first time, hopefully John's overview helped to catch you up on where we are with this process. What I want to turn to now is the online trade-off tool that we on our team have designed for your use today so that you can begin to grapple with the complexities of the puzzle that John just described for you, which is exactly the same puzzle that the Civic Working Group needs to work with in order to render its advice to the City Council, and ultimately the City Council itself will have to wrestle with in order to make a final decision and set of recommendations about how to proceed in building the kind of civic space that John was describing. In a few moments, what we will ask you to do is to begin to experiment with this online trade-off tool. It has been designed so it will work on the iPads that we have available in the room today. It is also going to be available online after today's workshop, so you can continue to work with it on your own at home, on your own tablet device or on a desktop computer, or other people who weren't able to attend today's workshop can also use it and provide their feedback as well. But let me give you first just a little bit of information about the overall structure of the trade-off tool so that you'll know how to work with it. And then the remainder of today's workshop will be going through each section of the available choices that you'll have to work with and give you a chance to experiment with it. Today, this is more about sort of understanding how the tool works, what the assumptions are, how the various pieces were put together for you to work with it, and really just sort of learn about how to use the trade-off tool. Tomorrow, when you come back, and hopefully all of you will, we're going to give you a little more specific direction about balancing the books so that the choices that you make about the various land uses and their parking requirements and so forth get paired up and matched with very specific judgments about potential philanthropic and public and private financing sources. So let me just say a few things about how the trade-off tool is physically structured. When you open the iPad, you'll see this screen. This is just a welcome screen that provides, just a little bit of introductory information. And you'll notice on the right here that there are 4 more pages, or screens as we call them, that go with the trade-off game. One involves choices about the programming and operation of the Civic Auditorium itself. The next one is a list of alternative arts and cultural and open space uses that you might choose from, all of which have been discussed regularly with the Civic Working Group and at our last workshop. The third screen will be information about the choices for private land uses that might be constructed on the site to help pay for the renovation of the Civic Auditorium and offset the construction costs for the other arts and cultural uses that might be of interest to you. And then the last screen provides some information about some philanthropic and public financing options to help pay for the program that you come up with. Our goal today is our objective today is to work through each one of these screens so that you understand what the choices are and begin to experiment with them a little bit to see what their implications are in terms of spatial consumption, parking, and financing costs in particular. Remy, you want to go to the next screen? So in a moment, when you open the iPad and come to the first of the working screens, this is the one for the Civic Auditorium. And I'm going to, in a few moments, I'm going to go through what's behind the choices available to you specifically for the Civic Auditorium. But I just want to point out a few things on the screen that you'll be looking at that you should pay attention to. This first one, which offers you 3 options for different character of programming and use of the Civic Auditorium. As you click on each one of these, you will see information about that option pop up on the screen. In this lower section of the screen will be some information about how much land area is being consumed for the Civic Auditorium. Of course, it's always the same because it's the same building, but on the other screens that will change. You'll see a tally of the amount of parking that is required. You'll see some information about the cost of construction. And you'll see some information about the operating deficit associated with each one of those. In addition to that screen-specific information that you'll see down here, There are two other sections of the screen where you'll also see some information change, particularly as you move through the online tool to the subsequent screens. This is where we keep track of your cumulative choices. So the first set of information is about the specific screen. The outer edges, both vertically and horizontally, are about your cumulative choices. So as you move through the trade-off tool and you pick some choices about the Civic, you pick some choices about arts and cultural uses and private land uses, you'll start to see the buildup of the land area consumed, the total amount of parking relative to the available parking, which, by the way, is all assumed to be subterranean, 3 levels of parking under the entire site, not on the surface. And very importantly, for purposes of the more focused work we're going to do tomorrow, you'll begin to see the cumulative effect of the choices you're making in terms of overall construction cost and operating deficit. So keep that in mind as you begin to work with the screen. Okay, now let's talk about the Civic Auditorium choices specifically. I got it. Okay, Remy, you can skip past this slide. Okay, in the work that we've done over the last year with the Civic Working Group, talking about the Civic Auditorium, and as a result of the first workshop that many of you in the room today attended, we have had a lot of conversation about what the alternative uses for the Civic Auditorium might be. For purposes of this trade-off game, we have defined 3 different ideas about what might happen in a reconstructed use of the Civic Auditorium. The idea is that the building, for the most part, would remain physically as you see it, because it's a locally designated historic structure, but there could be a lot of differences about what happens inside the Civic Auditorium. So the first option, and the one that the city was pursuing until we lost the resource of tax increment financing available from redevelopment, is a vision of the use of the Civic that is focused primarily as an entertainment and arts complex that would be operated by a private party. This would be a facility that accommodates about 2,600 seats, but not fixed seating, in a movable seating arrangement, would require a little less than 1,000 parking spaces to accommodate it, and would be programmed primarily to focus on commercial entertainment, concerts, Broadway shows, that sort of thing, with some amount of free community programming, but probably a relatively minor amount, because this is one that would be operated by a private profit-making entity. But because it would be privately operated, it also, although it implies a need for a fairly significant amount of capital investment to build it, which the private operator would expect the city to contribute towards, the operator, thank you, the operator would basically pay for all the operating costs out of the income earned from ticket sales, online food and beverage sales, and merchandise sales. So there would not be any ongoing operating deficit that the city would have to be responsible for. So that's one of its distinguishing characteristics. The second, and this slide just basically shows you the relative scale of the cost to construct that vision for the Civic Auditorium. All of these costs have been benchmarked against 2 things. One is the original cost estimate that was proposed for the project when the city was preparing to enter into an agreement with the Nederlander organization to actually operate this kind of facility, and secondly, other comparable facilities around the country. The cost that we are using for all these civic concepts includes the cost of construction, seismic retrofit, improvements to accommodate the physically disabled, all of the equipment that has to go into it, and the cost of subterranean parking associated with the needs for this particular activity, and then a series of contingencies. These are order of magnitude estimates. Nobody's done any detailed design work at this point in the process, but they are reasonable order of magnitude estimates of the cost of building this particular version of the Civic Auditorium. The second concept for the Civic Auditorium that you can think about choosing is one that is not run by a private operator, but one that would be managed by a nonprofit entity. much like the Broad Stage is in Santa Monica, but a larger scale facility. It would be a center for the performing arts with fixed seating for approximately 2,600. It would have a parking requirement that is essentially the same as the first example that we showed you, but it would have a somewhat higher capital cost because the nonprofit operated Civic Center would not probably bring with it the kind of investment that a private operator would make for certain interior technical improvements beyond the cost of construction. And because it is a nonprofit operation, it would probably operate at a fairly significant deficit that we've estimated at about $2.2 million a year, which, by way of reference, is the order of magnitude of deficit that caused the city to close the Civic 2 years ago. So this is a concept for the Civic in which it is focused primarily on performing arts, but because it's a nonprofit operation, it would require a fairly significant amount of subsidy above and beyond ticket prices and whatever on-site food and beverage sales might occur inside the facility. And this just shows you similarly the scale of the cost of it. It's somewhat higher than the first example. The third idea for the Civic Auditorium, rather than using it for performing arts or other large audience activities, would be one in which the interior of the building is significantly changed so that it is subdivided into a lot of smaller, flexible spaces for a different program of annual activity. One that would be more focused on local cultural offerings, have a very flexible layout for a variety of different kind of performance venues. It could be configured with movable seats for about 1,000 people at a time. That would be the largest space available, or less than half the size of the seating available in either of the first two examples. As a result, it would have a somewhat lower parking requirement, about 700 spaces as opposed to almost 1,000. On the other hand, the cost of cutting up the Civic into these different spaces would be more expensive than either of the other two options, and the operating deficit would also be higher. So, go ahead. And this slide, again, just shows what's included in our order of magnitude working estimate of the cost. So here again, just to sum up, the three choices available to you for the Civic Auditorium in the future have somewhat different costs of construction, as you can see on the left, but rather significantly different annual operating deficit implications. Essentially zero in the first case, and growing to either $2 to $3 million a year in the case of the other options. Another way of sort of thinking about this is to take 20 years of annual operating deficit and translate that to a present value and add it on top of the capital cost so that everything is in current dollars. And you can see that the combination of the sum of annual operating costs over 20 years plus the capital cost of paying for the construction begins to differentiate these choices. So the very first and most important thing in the trade-off tool that you need to do, and we're about to get into it now, is to make a selection of which of these concepts for operating the Civic Auditorium make the most sense to you, and begin to get a feel for what the cost and parking and land implications of making those choices are. So we're now about to turn to the iPads that are at your table. We have enough iPads so that somewhere between 2 and 3 of you can share them at a time. So you've all been, hopefully at this point, individually logged into the iPad so that your individual choices will stay with you as we work through the day. Can we keep the chatter down for a second, please? I'm not quite done. Hang on one more second. Shh. Hang in there, we're not quite done. So at this point, what we would like you to do is to have a little bit of discussion at the table about the reasons, what you think about these choices for the Civic and which ones make the most sense to you. And then you're going to have a chance to actually make a selection and see the implications in the trade-off tool itself. I know that there are probably various questions that you have about this. There are going to be a number of people floating around that will help you answer them. They are members of our consulting team who are here, a variety of city staff, and others. So please turn to the Civic Working Group member who is sitting at your table, who's going to help you get set up on the iPad itself. We're loving the energy in the room. The buzz is terrific. It sounds like you're all having excellent conversations. So has everyone had a chance to make at least an initial selection from the iPad on the Civic Auditorium choices? Can I see hands? Very good. Okay. The other thing I just want to, a couple of other things about the trade-off tool I want to point out is that your choices are not irrevocable. You can change them. And as we work through the various screens of the trade-off tool, one of the important things about its interactive character is as you learn something about the implications of your choices, you can then go back and change your choices. And so the way that this has been designed and the reason that we all logged you in under individual ID numbers at the beginning is so that your choices remain with you individually, even though you're sharing the iPad, but it allows you to go back and make changes to your individual choices, which we expect will happen to some degree today as you're learning to work with it, but probably more importantly tomorrow when we impose a little bit more constraint on the financing options that are available. Okay, now we want to move on to the second page or second screen in the trade-off tool, which has to do with the optional arts and cultural and open space uses that could go on the parking lot part of the site outside the Civic Auditorium. And my colleague Remy Montico from our Los Angeles office of HRNA is going to walk you through a summary of what those choices are. But as I hopefully all of you have seen at your tables, there is a hard copy of all our presentation slides so that if you need to refer back to any of the information we're giving you verbally, you have a resource that you can use to refresh your memory as you're working through it. So here's Remy.
Hi there. So as Paul said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the choices you can make on the third tab of the iPad, which is for additional cultural and open space uses on the rest of the site. So one of the important requests that we have here is that you actually try to fill the entire site with new land uses. The assumption here is that the entire parking lot site is under reconsideration. So it's important that as you move through the next few tabs of the tool, you do try to actually fill it up with your uses. So the site could accommodate a number of additional cultural uses that could contribute to a very vibrant arts and cultural district. I'm going to talk about these that are on the screen now in just a little bit of detail. And as Paul said, you can always access this material in the workbook that's actually on your table. So the first additional use is a flexible performance and event space. This could possibly interact with an adjacent plaza if you choose to have some open space. The programming here is really up for grabs. It would truly be flexible. So it could host any number of events, including dance, theater, music, lectures, special events, meetings, galas, events. So it's truly quite flexible. It comes at a cost of about $17 million, and it would have capacity for about 850 people. The next cultural use that could be added onto the site is a small music venue. This is an interesting one because it could possibly be run by a sort of for-profit operator. This would be sort of a cabaret or jazz style venue with about 250 seats. And like I said, because possibly a for-profit operator would manage it, it would come at no additional operating cost to the city. So it's a very interesting option. Another cultural use that you might be, interested in adding that would add to vibrancy on the site would be a rehearsal and hub space. So the rehearsal space would have a space that was similar in scale to the stage of the Civic Auditorium, so acts that were performing there could rehearse there, but would also have rehearsal space for local artists. The hub would be a space for nonprofit administrative offices or studios. It would basically be office space for arts and cultural organizations. This would come at a cost of about $7 million. The next arts use that you might want to add on the site is one of the two museums. So this is the Fine Arts Museum option. It could have any kind of collection. It could be modern or classical or local in theme. This is one of the more expensive options. It comes at a cost of about $30 million and would have a $1.5 million annual operating deficit. And then the second type of museum under consideration is a more experiential museum that could link art and science and technology or some other mission. So this would, be similar in cost and operating deficit to the Fine Art Museum. It would just have sort of a different programming focus. Another use might be what we're calling the artist space, which would basically be space for artists to practice their craft and have some common space. There would be capacity for about 8 rotating artist studios and 6 other small studios, as well as a common space for them. It would come at about a $9 million capital cost and have about a $500,000 operating deficit. There could also be an educational and maker facility on this site. This would be for both the digital and traditional media or other types of making, be that for technology or something like woodworking. There would be classrooms and space for both adults and kids to make things with potentially the help of mentors and organizations that work with that type of craft. It would come at a cost of about $5 million. And have about a $400,000 operating deficit. So as I just went through, some of these are more costly than others on both a construction side and on an ongoing operating basis. You can see that the flexible performance space and the fine arts museums and the experiential museum are somewhat more expensive than the others, as well as having a higher operating deficit. The small music venue, of course, has no operating deficit, but does have a capital cost. So as you click through each of these, you'll see how the bars move and be able to play with, how much you want to spend on both the capital and the operating side. So in addition to arts and cultural uses on the site, new open space on the site might also contribute to the vibrancy of an arts and cultural campus. So the idea here is that this would be relatively highly programmed open space that would be relatively unique in Santa Monica. So because of how highly programmed it is, there would be an opportunity for these open spaces to generate some earned income through events and programs. So our operating assumption right here is that that 15% of the total operating expense of the open space would be able to be covered by programs and events that were run on the site that generated some income. So the main difference between all of the open space options that you have on your tab is the size of them. The programming, could go in a number of directions, whether that's, cultural events, big sculptures or public art or fountains or gardens. So the main difference is really size. The smallest one is a half-acre park. The next largest is a 1-acre park, which might have more space for some, outdoor events and cultural gatherings. The next one is a 2-acre park. And the last is a 4.5-acre park, which basically, if you choose the Civic and a 4.5-acre park, that's the entire site. The 4.5-acre park would presumably have some space for, major outdoor performance events and that type of thing. Lastly, there is an option for a sports field that would provide some playing space for community members, whether that be soccer or lacrosse or any other space. Included in the land estimate for the sports field is some area for spectators as well. So you can choose all of these options on that sort of darker blue third tab. And we have a few questions for you as well on the next slide, Paul. Oh.
Sorry, go ahead. You might just want to point out that the choices are on the left this time instead of the top.
Sure, yeah. So you can see they're under sort of 3 tabs there, the additional performance uses, like the small music venue, that type of thing. The additional cultural uses, those would be the museums, the 2 museum options, the artist space, and then the open space uses. And you can choose any number of these. Just keep in mind that you don't want to use, you may not want to use all of your land. So please take a few minutes to discuss and choose your preferred uses.
One thing, just as I've gone around the tables, not surprisingly, because this is Santa Monica and this is an interesting topic, people have ideas for which they have no choice, because we didn't think of it, which is not surprising. There's going to be a comment period at the end, and if you feel we've left something out, there are ideas that haven't been considered, you don't like any of the choices, you got new ones, there'll be an opportunity at the end to say that, and we encourage that. So please keep your comments in your head, and we get to the comment period, we'll do that. So now we're going to shift. We've sort of finished the shopping spree section of the conversation. You've all had a chance to accumulate that which you want to buy. So we got this big credit card bill here. We all know what we want, and we know how much it costs, and we know how much land it takes up. So now we're at the point of the discussion where we say, okay, we've got this vision in our head. We know it'll create this vital, energetic, urban, special place that'll be a real gem in the heart of Santa Monica. So how do we pay for it? So you're now going to go through a set of choices about how you pay for what you want to build. And let me just walk you through a series of screens to orient you through it. Now, here's what we did for you. We said, for everything you want to build, this is government. You're going to get money 2 ways. You're going to get money because you're the government and you collect taxes. So if you build a hotel, you get the bed tax. If it's a residence, you'll get your share of the property tax. So we said for each of these uses, you're the city, you'll get tax revenue. And then you own the land. So like anybody else who's contributing their land, and to be clear, we've assumed the city never, ever, ever sells the land. You're gonna lease it, and you'll get an annual payment based on a lease. And then we've taken all that money and we've dumped it into a bucket for you, and we've said, okay, the city's gonna take that revenue stream and it's gonna borrow against it, which is what government does when it wants to build a park or it wants to build a police station or something like that. So again, since I can't do this for people like me and others, we said, okay, we're going to collect all this money, and then we're going to borrow money based on that revenue stream, and that's going to be available to you to build things. So that's in your computer. So let's talk now about what will create this tax revenue and this ground lease revenue. So here's the list, and I showed it to you before, and like anything else, some uses produce more money and some uses present less. And I'd urge you, as you're thinking about this, to have a couple of things in your mind. One is, what's going to create energy? The goal is to create a place. The goal is to create a place of excitement and activity, and a place that Santa Monicans want to come and creates a civic destination. Well, would an office building contribute to that? Would a hotel contribute to that? What would contribute to making this a special place? Then you'll say, okay, well, how much money does it earn? And clearly there are huge differences between what an apartment building, what an office building, and what a hotel would earn. So you'll have to say, okay, I may or may not like the use. I may think uses are better or worse. That's a personal judgment each of you will make. And you'll say, well, okay, well, maybe it's not my first choice, but it generates more revenue. Or maybe I don't care how much revenue it generates. It shouldn't be here. So you'll make those set of choices based on how you want to fund this great new place in Santa Monica. And you know, this is in many ways the most interesting chart, because this takes 2 variables. How big is it, and how much money does it generate? And it says, per square foot, how do I get the biggest bang for my buck? So I only have my 4.3 acres. I got to earn enough money. Which uses give me the most bang per buck? So I have space for parks. So I have space for a jazz club. I have space for rehearsal. I have place for other arts or other civic activities. How do I use the site to generate the most significant amount of money on the smallest square foot possible? And this chart tells you. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. This just takes each of the things that I showed you, gives you sort of a visual way, and they're all in the books you have on your table. It says, okay, like what's a micro storefront actually look like? How much would it contribute? And if you, this is a good example. Like a micro storefront's cool. It's got a lot of flexibility. It's going to generate, you know, $240,000 of capital. You know, you'll build a window. You know, at the other end of the spectrum, you know, retail that has a more of a destination draw, that people would come from other places. You know, that maybe for each store you get a $4 million capital contribution. So for each kind of retail, you see how much money you're going to earn from it. This does the same thing for restaurants. You see, not a huge amount of money in the business. Exciting, important, good for vibrancy and energy. This shows you some prototypes. Let's assume maybe we get better architecture, but these are the examples we've got. Let's not turn this into an aesthetic contest. This isn't an award for the most beautiful building. This just sort of says, okay, kind of like how big is it, right? And I'm going to assume it's going to look nicer than this, but this is what it is, right? And you can see now we're generating some meaningful amount of money. One of the limitations of this model, I think it's, hopefully you've enjoyed it, I've enjoyed it, is, you know, we'll be able to get double count. Like in the real world, we'd put retail in the bottom of these units. So the restaurant or some of the small shops would go in the base of these things. That was just too complicated for us to sort out in the computer systems. So these are just pure apartments. But in the real world, we'd get retail here too. Oh, they do. Okay, they do include the retail. Thank you. They did it. Oh, it says ground floor retail right there. Shows me what I know. Okay, let's go to the next one. So let's go to the next one. Now this is office. Again, let's not judge the design. And here you could also have ground floor retail. But is the ground floor retail in here, Remy, or not? It's in the large one, but not in the smaller ones. Obviously, small office would be the whole thing. So, and then we go into the hotel. Again, no comment on design, but it shows you our big money winner, the mid-range national flag. Boutique gives you also a pretty significant financial hit. And that, again, that's a function of your tax structure. Okay, next slide. So, okay, that really gives you, now you're going to go back to your iPads. Actually, Paul's going to explain this.
Okay, just a couple of things about what happens on this particular screen, as we call it, about the private land uses. Again, the point of this is that your choices here enable you to basically build up your available budget to pay for the cost of construction of the arts and cultural uses you've selected on the prior screens, as well as the Civic Auditorium itself. It's not the only funding source. We're going to talk about some more on the last screen, you know, at the end of the workshop. But this is one available source of funding to support the construction cost. Like the Arts and Cultural Uses tab that you worked on a few minutes ago, your available choices are along the left-hand side of the screen. Each one of those that you click on will bring up a set of choices that you can pick. On the smaller uses, like the small restaurants and the small retail, and even in the case of the smaller apartment buildings, you get a choice of not just one of each, but you can actually pick one or two or three, or I think in the case of the micro retail, you can get up to 5. So you have not only a choice of which of these private land uses you're interested in, but you also get a choice about how many of them that you want if you think that they would contribute to the kind of vibrancy of a mixed-use arts and cultural district. Now, as you're making these choices, we have built into the software already the dollar amounts that go with each one of your choices. So on the bottom of the, underneath the description of the choices, you will see some information about how much money you are getting from the selections on that particular screen, and then the cumulative total of all your private development sources, assuming you make some, will be matched against your capital cost budget for the arts and cultural uses on the right-hand side of the screen where those red bars are. So you'll start to see some adjustments beginning to take place between the cost of construction and the sources of funds to pay for things. And you'll begin to get a feel, I think, for how much each of these private land uses could help pay for that construction cost. Okay, so as before, we've got a couple of questions for you to think about and discuss with your colleagues at the table, and then we'd like you to make some selections from the private land use page. So enjoy. Okay, folks, if you'll pay attention one more time. Could I ask you to stop talking for a moment, and we'll get back to chatter and good conversation in a minute. We want to go through one last very important screen in the trade-off game, which we'll go into probably in a little more depth tomorrow than we will today, but it's important that you understand what's there. This is the fifth and final screen in the trade-off game, and what it includes for your consideration is other financing sources that could be brought to bear in addition to the bondable revenue stream that comes from private development, which John described a few moments ago and which you had some time to experiment with. For purposes of the trade-off game, we are making some assumptions, and that's all they are at this point, though we think they're reasonable and in the right order of magnitude, but certainly not, final judgments about anything. We are making some assumptions about a couple of additional revenue sources that could be tapped to pay for annual operating deficit, and a couple of other sources that could be used to pay for one-time construction costs for the Civic Auditorium and for the mix of arts and cultural uses that you might choose. So I want to go through a brief descriptions of what those are so you have some background about them, and then you'll be able to, again, make a choice about whether to use them or not, and see to what degree they contribute to matching up with the costs of the facilities, both in construction terms and operating terms, of the choices that you've made up till this point. Okay, so on the capital funding side, which means construction cost, it's just our sort of accounting lingo, but on the capital funding sources, because, as we explained before, because of the assumptions that are built into the trade-off tool, as you selected a combination of individual private land uses, assuming you pick some, we have already calculated internally what the revenue available for offsetting capital cost is, and that's already reflected. So, there's nothing more to do on that other than choose or elect not to choose some combination of private land uses. On the last screen in the trade-off game, however, there are either 2 or 3 other sources of funds that you can select. One of them is a general obligation bond, and I'll say a little bit more about what that is and some other cautions about using it. We also have an option for you to choose for a capital fundraising campaign, which is fairly typical of arts and cultural uses, in which the typically nonprofit sponsor of the organization goes into an aggressive mode to try to raise capital from private donors and the philanthropic community, sometimes involving the use of naming rights, not always. And we've made some assumptions about what can reasonably be assumed could be raised through that vehicle based on looking at lots and lots of examples around the country. The fourth possibility, but only if you picked the first version of the Civic Auditorium, that is the one that would be operated by a private party and would be used for sort of Broadway shows and concerts and so forth with ticket revenue, If you pick the first version of the Civic choices, there is also the possibility of additional revenue coming in from a revenue bond based on a ticket tax at about 5% of the ticket price, which is a fairly common thing used for funding arts and cultural uses around the country. But if you picked either of the latter two options for the Civic that are operated by nonprofits, that revenue stream would not be available. On the annual operating side, there are a couple of choices available for paying for annual operating deficit. The first is an assumed contribution that the council would make out of the general fund on an annual basis. The dollar amount that we've picked is $1 million, not because the council has decided that. It could be more, it could be less. It would always be subject to annual appropriation decision based on, the condition of the city's budget and, the general economy and all those other considerations. But for purposes of the trade-off tool, we've assumed that one option would be an annual $1 million contribution from the city's general fund. A second one would be operating philanthropy. That is private fundraising that would be done separate from raising money for construction, but to fill the gap of the annual operating deficit. And here again, we've made some assumptions based on benchmarking with comparable facilities around the country and elsewhere about how much that could yield. Now, those are not necessarily ultimately the only sources of funds that could be used. On this particular slide, we've identified a number of others that we think ultimately might be available, but our ability to quantify them for purposes of the trade-off game really can't be done at this point because they require a much more specific design of what the arts and cultural campus might be, with more specific information about the size and scale of individual choices. So we list them here to let you know that we've already thought about them and we're holding them in reserve, but we can't really quantify them at this point in the Civic Working Group's process. It is possible that as we move closer and closer to the Civic Working Group making its recommendations to the council, that we'll have a more definitive strategy for the site that would allow us to include some of these other options. But for purposes of the trade-off game, we recognize they're available, but they're not included. Okay. In terms of the two types of bonds, there's a general obligation bond and a revenue bond. We've already talked a little bit about the revenue bond strategy because it's linked to your choices about private land uses. So I'm going to focus primarily about the general obligation bond. This is a bond which is often used for paying for public capital facilities, fire stations, police stations, roads, bridges, and so forth. It is a commitment of citywide tax revenue to pay off the bond. It's a form of public borrowing that is backed by the assessed value of land in the city. All property owners pay for it, whether they're homeowners or business property owners. Very often in Santa Monica, the Rent Control Board has allowed the per unit allocation to be passed through to tenants in the form of slight increases in rent. So generally speaking, everybody pays for it to one degree or another. For purposes of the trade-off game only, we have assumed a $50 million bond measure, general obligation bond measure, which is not untypical for average size public facilities that have been funded in Santa Monica in the past. What that translates to is about $12 of annual cost on the property tax bill of every property owner in the city, or to say it another way, about $120 a year for $1 million home. So one of the things to bear in mind is that you would be asking all property owners in the city to pay for this if you select this funding source, and most importantly, it requires a 2/3 vote to pass it. Post Proposition 13, general obligation bonds in California require a supermajority approval, which is very, very tough to achieve. So while it's easy to click on the choice to select it and put it into your funding bucket, the actual practice of getting it is much more complicated than that. It requires getting the 2/3 vote. That typically requires, a sophisticated campaign committee to push it, to collect money to run the campaign. Not an easy thing to do. But for something that is highly meritorious and for which you think you can get significant voter support, it is certainly a viable option and one that you might choose to select. Remy, you want to just go to the next slide? Okay, going to the other source of capital funding, that is for construction, what we've looked at is a variety of arts and cultural facilities around the country and come to the conclusion that you could reasonably assume that with a very aggressive effort to raise private capital from the philanthropic community, wealthy individuals, private foundations, and so forth, that one can reasonably assume that you might be able to raise somewhere in the $20 to $23 million range to pay for the cumulative cost of construction of arts and cultural uses that you may have selected in the trade-off game. Remember, that includes both the Civic Auditorium, whichever version of it you picked, and all the miscellaneous arts and cultural uses, the sum total of which probably adds up to a pretty big number. So this is not a trivial amount, but it is a contribution along with some of the other funding sources that could help. Okay, let's move on. All right, then again, on the annual operating side, I've already talked a little bit about the annual general fund contribution. It could be sort of just generally designated from the city's general fund, or it could be a dedicated share, for example, of the transient occupancy tax on hotel rooms. But again, this is a general assumption for purposes of the trade-off game. I don't think there are any council members in the room, so I'll just say that whether they will be willing to do this or not is an open question, but we think it is a reasonable assumption to make for purposes of what we're doing today and tomorrow. And then on the operating philanthropy side, again, we've looked at best practices and common practices around the country, and we believe that it is reasonable to assume that the kinds of arts and cultural uses that we're talking about in this trade-off game would be capable of generating cumulatively somewhere in the $5 million a year range. Again, I think as you'll learn, that amount relative to the total cost, annual operating cost from all the arts and cultural choices you're making is not a big share, but it adds up, compared with other choices that you're making. So these are the two basic choices that you will have to supplement the funding on annual operating costs, and then you'll have these two operating general obligation bond and capital fundraising to help pay for the capital cost of your arts and cultural uses. Again, we have already built into all of this what you would get from your private land use choices. So the last choices on this fifth screen are on top of that. The other thing that, although we didn't talk about it before, that we have built into the math on this is that for all the miscellaneous arts and cultural uses you may have selected, whether it's one of the fine arts museums or it's the rehearsal space, all of those arts and cultural uses, or many of them, typically generate a certain amount, though relatively small amount, of earned income from on-site food and beverage sales or merchandise sales, or in some cases, ticket revenue from performances. So as you picked all those arts and cultural uses, we've already assumed a little bit of earned income from them as well. So whatever the deficit is that you're trying to match with these other operating sources, already take that into account. So the challenge before you now, and again, today is just pure experimentation, so you get familiar with it. We're going to try to focus your attention on trying to match these resources with costs a little more specifically tomorrow. But for purposes of today, what we'd like you to do, just as with the other screens, is click on the choices, see the implications, get a feel for how much these revenue sources align with the choices you've made about arts and cultural uses and private land uses. So here are some questions you might want to discuss at the table while you're thinking about that, and then proceed to actually work through this last screen on the trade-off tool. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of working with the trade-off tool, and we want to give you some information about how you can keep engaged with this process, including our continued work tomorrow. Please note on this, up on the screen, that after the workshop today, if you're interested in continuing to work with the trade-off tool at home this evening, you can go to the link that's on the left-hand side of the screen, and that will take you to exactly the same screen you've been working with today, and that link will be live until tomorrow morning. So this will give you a chance to continue working with it and enhancing your understanding of how it works, so that you might come back tomorrow even better equipped than you are at this moment. At tomorrow's workshop, we're going to give you some feedback about the preliminary choices that you made today. We're keeping real-time data record of all the choices that are being made in the room today. And so what we're going to do is give you a little bit of feedback about how many people picked this, that, and the other thing, just for your information. And then we're going to engage in a somewhat more structured approach to working through the trade-off tool, in which we're going to ask you to do a more specific job of balancing everything in the tool, the amount of land you use, the amount of parking you use, and getting your sources and uses of funds lined up with your program decisions. That's the key objective for tomorrow. So today we've just been sort of experimenting with it, getting the feel for it, beginning to understand how these things trade off tomorrow. And then tomorrow we're going to try to do this in a somewhat more directed way to try to come to some initial judgments where things balance out. And then at the very end of the workshop, again, we'll be able to feed back to you almost instantaneously some information about the choices that the collective group made. So that's what's on the agenda for tomorrow. At tomorrow's workshop, we will be logging in again to the trade-off tool, but we're starting fresh. So everything that you do today, although we're saving the actual, basic information, won't be carried over from today to tomorrow. Tomorrow we start fresh. And again, we'll do that so that we can record your choices and be able to give you some feedback about your preferences. Beyond the workshop tomorrow, the trade-off tool will be hosted on the city's website, on the Civic Auditorium webpage, and that will be available, I think, by the middle of next week. So those of you who want to continue to work on this some more will have the opportunity to do it, but just as importantly, people who weren't able to attend the workshop today will be able to log in and begin freshly. All the background information that we presented to you today, both in terms of the summary presentation booklets that are at the table, will all be on the website. City TV is recording today's session, so there's going to be a edited video of today's events that people can have access to for reference. And so, although people logging in for the first time won't have the full benefit of the information you got today live, it'll be pretty close. And so we're hoping that that will be an additional way to get an even broader range of public participation over the course of the next 2 weeks. And then we'll be summarizing the results of all of that for the Civic Working Group to aid them in their ongoing planning process. So that's what's ahead. Remy, did I forget anything? Or is that's it? Okay. So just to conclude, we are now done using the iPads, so please return them to the Civic Working Group member who is at your table. Don't walk off with them because the city's going to pay for any that walk out the door. And also please turn the presentation booklets back to your facilitator at the table. But don't leave yet, because there are still two parts of the formal agenda, one of which may be more important to you than some others, and that is public comment. So we're now going to ask the Civic Working Group members to come back up to the dais. We're going to open the floor for public comment on anything that occurred today that you want to talk about, and then the Civic Working Group members will close the session.
So that concludes our exciting activity. I don't know about you guys, but that was like a dream come true for me. I guess you guys liked it too, or some of you. So I'd like to just hear if anybody in this group, the Civic Working Group, has anything to report in general, just a quick impression of their experience just now, just a minute or two. Why don't we just start at the end and go down? Fred?
Well, the experience was very good. We had a very diverse group. Major concerns were about development, but once they got into the program and saw that it was all started again. My group was a very diverse group. I thank them for their participation. They had started out with a major concern of development, which is that word in Santa Monica. The choices on the givens were a very big help, and I think everyone really worked and came up with their own decisions on what direction they want to go.
I just want to say that that software tool, I think, was super helpful as I watched our table wrestle with some of the same problems that we've been talking about for, I guess, about a year now. And to watch people work through piece by piece and then go back and change it, I think I'd encourage everyone to keep doing it on the website online and keep playing with it. And hopefully we'll get some good answers at the end.
Oh, I've got one. At my table, we had quite a few very experienced people in Santa Monica, and so they were very familiar with many of the issues and brought many ideas of their own to the table. The only concern that was expressed was getting used to the fact that the tool, of course, bundles things and is a little bit limiting and doesn't allow inclusion of some individual ideas and notions. But hopefully that will be part of the subsequent process. But I think I think our table will agree, we had a very stimulating set of discussions and some good ideas.
Yeah, we had a great table. It was me and 5 people. I think I could see, really got into the plan. They had terrific ideas for further elaborations of the program, allowing for more detail, both of being able to combine things and also divide things up. And I think that it behooves us that when we get into using this data, that we listen to get some of those comments, which I think we'll have. Personally, as somebody who came in $70 million short on the capital plan, I feel that there should have been there were missing opportunities for capital sources that I think we should be thinking about that are possible. So that's how I would leave it. Oh.
We had a very civically involved table, which is great, and they were very knowledgeable, and they were also very complimentary of the software that was designed. And what we found is that a lot of people had opinions that were not included among the choices. And so I agree with Yao in that they would like to see more expansive ways to get their points across and get their opinions heard.
I would agree that in many cases, the tool that we're using can be somewhat limiting, but that's where you now have the opportunity, as soon as we're done talking, to add the public comment, to include the ideas that cross the borders of what you saw in the online activity. So we're not going to discount by any means the other parts of this. You can combine different things. You may come up with a different idea yet that's not indicated in the tool that you can do by commenting to us, by writing to us. We want to still hear all alternatives. The tool is by no means a complete diagram of possibilities. There may be a possibility that one of you has out there that will be the magic bullet that we all need to make this work. So please, add to the discussion. Thank you.
As everyone else has said, I think the tool was amazing, and it did what I have been worried about throughout this process that we've been involved in, which is cost. How much is it going to cost? How much are we all willing to pay for it? Where's that money going to come from? And thank you all so much for coming, because this message needs to get out to people of how do we save the Civic? What do we do on this site that is the best possible option for the city, and how much is it going to cost?
I really want to thank folks at Table 6. I felt like we had a really rousing conversation and a lot of great participation, and I do think the tool really helped us sort of narrow in some things. And I encourage all of you to tell people who weren't here today to come and see us tomorrow. And we have more opportunities to go even deeper, especially into the balances. And especially anybody who has friends, constituents, other people get them to go online. It'll figure it out. It'll really be helpful. The more input we get, the easier it'll be for us to help sort of guide where we're going to go and make our suggestions to the council.
Thank you, everyone. At my group, at my table, we had a lot of experienced activists, as somebody said here. It was really interesting. Everybody was very articulate and polite, even though they had divergent points of view. And I encouraged them to engage and try to see if, because they had such different points of view, if they could come to a consensus about what would be a good plan. Don't know if they got there yet, but based on the charge the Civic Working Group was given by council for this process, getting an idea of how to find that consensus feeling from all of the different points of view is part of the exercise. Another thing that is really exciting about this that I think certainly the people at my table were taking a lot of interest in, and we're asking a lot of good questions, is the fact that this tool allows us as the public at large to participate in the next step in a process that we don't usually get to be involved in Santa Monica or in many cities, that this kind of working out more of the nuts and bolts and the financing is usually what happens once you find a user or a partner or whatever it is that is going to develop the site. So it's very, very exciting that we get to do that here. So as some of my working group members have pointed out, in order for this tool to work with all of their complex algorithms, certain limitations had to be determined so that it would work, and we want to make sure that the nuance that you guys had in mind when you made your choices are also on the record, and so we have speakers. And this is where you fill in the gaps and help us understand more about what you meant by your choices. So I'll call 3 names at a time so that you guys can be ready and try to move through everyone because we have many speaker cards. So are you gonna?
No, I was just going to say, while people are assembling at the 2 mics, I just wanted to give a particular shout out to Mike Walsh at MetroQuest, which is the web designer that took all of the detailed calculations and concepts that the HRNA project team put together and translated them into this pretty amazing decision-making tool that you worked on today.
On that note, I just really want to give a shout out to HRNA and the really amazing experience that we had as a public body working directly with the consultants and really seeing what they're doing and how much work goes into putting together a meeting like this with all of this information. Every single bit of information, every line on those slideshows represents a huge amount of work and research to get there, and we shouldn't take that for granted. So moving on to our speakers, the first 3 speakers are Mike Feinstein, Jerry Rubin, and Ann Hoover.
So on uses and financing, we talked about underground with parking. I think we need to look at adding a little bit of underground possibility for some of the practice spaces, recording studios, et cetera, things which were interesting auxiliary uses, maybe aren't big financial, but they were potential community uses that we shouldn't be doing above ground and taking away above ground open space. On the, for folks who had talked about a museum, I just want to suggest that the place for the museum is the Sears building rather than in here. I think when the Sears building flips over, we need to make sure that that becomes a museum. It's landmarked. It doesn't have any windows. It can't be developed for something else. On financing, the place for the hotel in my mind is the corner of Pico and Main here, the ugly building, the office building that Twitter's in. If that comes down, that becomes a hotel, maybe a 3-story stepped up from Ocean Avenue. It could be really pretty down to the intersection. That could give us a couple $1 million a year in terms of TOT to pay for operating expenses and close an operating gap, and again, not have to take open space here. Final 2 points, we need to find a way once we make this happen for it not to inappropriately gentrify. So we need some sort of conservation zone across the street for the Vidiot's building so that that building stays. And if there's going to become a second story with complementary office for what's here, to have it built on top of the historic building like they do with a lot of places in New York. And then finally, when we come to a bond, one of the reasons it's important to maximize the open space, and I'm willing to compromise to the 2 acres rather than the 4 that I pushed for when I was on council when we approved this originally, is that if we're going to pass a bond, the cultural arts community isn't going to be enough by itself to pass something like this. And if the open space community is part of the coalition to vote for a bond, it's more likely to pass. Thanks.
Let's not applaud every time. It'll slow us way down. Only, Jerry Rubin, Ann Hoover, Dean Williams.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here and all the work you're doing. Thanks for the food, too, and all the city staff and the consultants. I would like at some point in time to hear what the consultants are recommending, too. I say, well, you know, we're just listening. I'd like to hear what they have to say. I think we need to do every possibility to bring in the funding in a maximum way. And that's why I had written down on one of the boards that we should be planting a money tree. I think it's be a good idea. You know, wouldn't be a bad idea to get that great guy that just saved Vidiots, Mr. Ellison, to come forward and help out a little and some of his compatriots. Huh? No, it's not. No. His daughter, I mean, yeah. I think it's her father, though, is pretty good, too. Hey, all these guys. This Civic Auditorium is a gem. We know the great things that happen here. They'll happen here again. One thing I hope never happens, I don't think it will, but I read in the papers all the time about how they're trying to get this football field and team and all these great ideas for 10, 12, and no one's moving forward. And everybody's stuck because all these good ideas and everybody arguing back and forth. We got to start moving forward here because I want to still be alive when this is reopened. That's about it. Thank you, Michael. So, again, I think the space here, we have Tongva Park. I think we need some stuff here that's going to generate some money. And I thought Mike's ideas were also good. And I think a bond measure, even a 2/3 bond measure, I'm not an expert in this, but I do think the community would support it, and I think it's worth it in every way, shape, or form. And so I just want to thank you and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Ann Hoover, Dean Williams, and Alla.
I'm actually Joan Kranick. Ann Hoover yielded her time to me, so I'm not Ann Hoover. I am the PTSA president for Santa Monica High School, so I come here with that hat on. I'm also grown and raised in this community. I lived here my entire life, and so it's near and dear to my heart. As you know, at Santa Monica High School, we have over 3,000 students and 2,000 families. We represent, you know, a very important part of our community, and it's where all of our students are going to end up going, so it's important. We are very excited about the opportunities the Civic Center project presents, not just for Samo High, but for the city of Santa Monica as a whole. And we really look forward to working and dialoguing with you and with the City Council to help arrive at an ideal plan for revitalization of the Civic and its surrounding land that would include a vision of Samo High as being an important partner. We see many synergies and linkages between the Civic site and Samo High. We think there's something that needs to be looked at, and we want to be a positive partner, both physically and in spirit. We hope that the ultimate result reflects both the emphasis the city has always placed on supporting its excellent public schools, for which we are very grateful, and the premium support our schools have given to the city's efforts in return. I think that our location, our facilities, and strong school and community provide great opportunities for synergy and development, as I said, that will long shape the Civic Center as a beacon for culture, learning, and the arts. Hope we can work together with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Dean Williams, I'm told Ola has left, so we will go on to Guido Lamel after that.
Good day. My name's Dean. I am a resident property owner in Santa Monica. In addition to that, I went to school here in my youth, Santa Monica High. I snuck into this venue for a few rock and roll concerts back in the day. After that, after matriculating through school, I went into tourism. I was part of the opening team for the Lowe's Santa Monica Beach Hotel. I've went on to other tourism capacities, including working at the Pasadena Convention and Visitors Bureau. And with that backstory, I'm just looking at this footprint that we have of the Santa Monica Civic, and I've been enthusiastically participating in this. And I'm just waiting to hear any type of touchstones coming from the tourism industry, because Santa Monica, we live here, we know it's a tourism destination. I'm a musician, and I play the guitar, but I enjoy the arts, and they're definitely important, especially to our community. I guess just maybe for a synergy, I'm just looking at how the benefit of this footprint lends for enhancing the tourism conversation, and that is to, without getting into too much too much detail, but there's obviously a potential to bring a lot of valuable tourism dollars here that feed the restaurants and the hotels, things of that nature, and the tax opportunities that designing this footprint to allow it to facilitate a performing arts component, but give it the flexibility to operate and earn revenue during literally 7 days a week, 365 days a year, accommodating the different and very diverse opportunities that happen with what's called conventions. Now, I don't think this is a citywide convention town. However, with the existing doors that we have here, the existing keys, as it were, of hotel rooms, the hotels, a footprint here strategically developed would, again, allow what would be called a self-contained event to come here. Now, I would encourage you to look at the models of Pasadena and how they're able to have that happen. I mentioned Long Beach earlier. Bigger scope, but a city that's able to maintain and command and control events on its own is a very lucrative thing. I understand at Santa Monica's hotel occupancies, 87%. With the right footprint that would allow, and I personally do believe that smaller events that would fit in this city tend to be more affluent. They can afford the dollars, so you'd get very intimate groups that could afford to pay the rate. So it just bodes well if you have the tourism conversation. You have a wealth of vested partners existing here that I believe that you can align some type of funding that would enthusiastically give any type of shortfall there. I did also work with the Santa Monica CVB for about a year or so I'm really intimate with the dynamics. And Santa Monica adding the train coming in really gives this town a potential to structure it in a way that I think we have this magical thing where we can manage it in a way that supports our city well, that we can embrace those things that we want, the environmental things. There's a lot of things that could happen here that could make it experimental, and what comes to mind, I'll get out your way, is the ER, I can't remember the building, but it's built that with all the great environmental codes, it's just low carbon footprint. Conversations like that Santa Monica do, that could just make this a great footprint. So I'm available for anything. I'm at your complete disposal. It's important to me and my family, so thanks for your time.
Thank you. Guido Lamel, Joan Krennick, and Julia Natar.
Hi, everybody. Great to see you again, and wonderful. I'm still absolutely thrilled about this process, and I thank the panel here for putting together these discussions and these meetings. I think it's fantastic. Many of you probably know I'm the conductor of the Santa Monica Symphony, so I have a vested interest in this whole situation. What's interesting to me, it was mentioned earlier that we focused on the great history of the Civic Auditorium. I think we should be talking about the great future of the Civic Auditorium, and I believe that is what we're here for. We're actually talking about the future. There's been a great history, but I think there can be incredibly exciting things to come. Now, it so happens, my own orchestra, we have been having a terrific success. All our recent performances have been sellout performances. Okay, misnomer, because all of our concerts are free, but standing room only for Well, but still, it means that sadly we're actually having to turn people away. I mean, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. The saddest thing in the world is for somebody to show up and actually not be able to come into a performance that they've prepared and they brought their family, the whole thing. Nothing is more heartbreaking for me than that. Now, it so happens we're currently rehearsing for a concert that we have scheduled for March 14th, just because it happens to work halfway between the Martin Luther King performance we did 2 weeks ago and our May timeframe. However, we have a need. We do not actually have a concert hall available. It so happens that Santa Monica High School Auditorium that we usually use is completely booked up in March, because that's when the school itself uses it. So what this means is we have a critical need. Now, for the first time ever, the Santa Monica Symphony we're actually negotiating with auditoriums outside of Santa Monica so that we can perform at a time that happens to work out, on a community orchestra basis. That's unfortunate. Anyway, I just a few last comments. Some of the things that I was discussing with the table where I was at table 6, and we had wonderful discussions. I think, for me, it's very, very important that this crown jewel location not be forced to sort of earn its keep. The idea of, we saw pictures of apartment buildings or office buildings, all that sort of thing. Because an apartment building could bring in $2 million or $4 million, or even in the largest case, 175 apartments might bring in $10 million. It's sort of like when I go on vacation, it's the one time that I don't say, okay, now, how much money will I earn for this particular activity? There's an analogy there. This crown jewel is the thing that all the rest of the city, all those thousands of apartment complexes, those, I believe, thousands of condominiums that are under construction right now, all that should fund what here doesn't have to earn its place. This place shouldn't have to pay for itself. It should be the icing on the cake of Santa Monica. I believe we have the community, we have the support to do that. Another point that I brought out was the fact that, yes, in this day, there's a lot of press about the fact that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, or let's say there's a wider spread between the two. But there is a silver lining to that cake, and that is the fact that there are, I've read articles about that there is now a higher percentage of people who actually feel that they have some disposable income that they can donate, that they can give to projects that they find worthy. So I believe that tapping into that, the idea of a bond measure or whatever, or just simply actually the capital campaign, I think for what we do here can be a success. As I've spoken before, my own feeling is that this Civic Auditorium should absolutely be preserved, renovated, and used as the large entertainment facility for Broadway shows, for rock stars. Yes, it's true, we probably can't bring Bruce Springsteen here because, yes, he's performing at the Rose Bowl and Staples Center, larger things. But yes, there are people on their way up who can do that sort of thing. But we need a great concert hall. That will always be my thrust. And I still think that, yes, someday we're going to find one or two people who will want to have something in their name, because it's an interesting thing. Somebody who's worth $500 million or $1 billion, there are thousands of billionaires now. Anyway, somebody who's got $1 billion has an easier time parting with 100 million than a whole community of people who are looking at their bottom line, trying to figure, okay, so this is what I'm spending on rent, this is what I'm spending on tuition. I think the money's going to come from a white knight. Anyway, however, we need a concert hall. Help us with that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I believe Joan spoke for Ann Hoover. Is that? Oh, now, okay, so we're switching. It's very confusing, but I think we got it. And after that, it will be Julia Notar and then Larry Areola.
Hey, sorry about all that confusion. We didn't know how many speakers there were, but I'm Ann Hoover, and I'm speaking both as a Sam Ojai parent, but also as just as a resident. I'm really jazzed by the idea of a Civic One. I think a lot of people are. It will generate, if we do like a ticket tax or something like that, money to pay for other uses of the open space site. I know I said this before at the last meeting, just as we come together and figure out what the best use is here, this is more than just a commercial property. I mean, this is unique. That's why we're going through this amazing process. The software that HRNA has developed to help us vision that is amazing. Thank you so much. But so I really want to echo what my plaid-clad gentleman over there said. It doesn't have to pay for itself. This is the heart of our city. We need to make it amazing. And if we can, all of us, consultants group and the public, pull together and come up with something amazing, if we build it, they will come. And by they, I mean the money. I just read it on my phone. Vidiots has just been saved by Megan Ellison. There are people who will help us put it all together, and when you throw in the, general obligation bond and all sorts of other things, I think we need to figure it out first and foremost, and the money is there. We can piece that puzzle together. Just back on the Civic One point and Samo High, I mean, we do have Barnum, we do have the Greek, and if we can synergize and pull those pieces of Samo into this civic heart of our town, arts complex, that would be amazing. And then I think all of you know I'm a big fan of open space, so I realize we may not end up with the soccer field that Samo High wants, but let's keep it green, let's keep it open, let's keep it horizontal, let's keep it the breath of fresh air that it is right now. I drop my daughter off at like 6:45 every morning now, and I do love, I come down 4th Street and, there's the parking garage and the DoubleTree, and then honestly, I pull into this civic space, and even though it's concrete, it feels great. It's open, and I can kind of sort of see the ocean, so keep it horizontal if we can. I love that. And then I have my last point. This is the last time I'll say this, and it's I know I'm the one who keeps pounding away on the Child Development Center, and I know it's going to happen, and I get it, and there's a 30-year history, and it's great, and I'm a huge supporter of all that it stands for, but I do want to go on record as saying I'm disappointed that it's here because it's not something that's really going to serve thousands of people like the rest of the space can, both in and out of Santa Monica. So I'm disappointed that the city went in that direction. I understand it, I respect it, but I'm disappointed, and I wish that 1.8 acres could still be a part of what we are figuring out. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, Natar, Larry Areola, Bill Davids.
Hi, I'm Julia Notar. I'm a grad student at UCLA right now. I've been living in Santa Monica for the last 3 years and West LA for about the last 10 years. I have a more specific comment, and just have to fly my little flag here because I am part of the Santa Monica Rugby Club, and so one thing that we would like to do is we would really like to see the sports field there. I think that it would really help contribute to a really vibrant cultural campus in a way, that some of the restaurants do, maybe some retail, whatever kinds of compromises or agreement we come to on that. I think that a sports field is an integral part of that because it serves not only local but visiting needs as well at the same time. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Larry Areola, Bill Davids, Bruce Cameron. Oh, Larry's gone. Bill Davids, Bruce Cameron, and Jeremy Stutz.
Hi, I want to bring to your attention an article that was in the New York Times, the Sunday New York Times, January 18th, about the restoration of theaters in basically dead business districts in the New York City area. The Lowe's Kings in Brooklyn is reopening as a concert performance venue on February 3rd. This article is very instructive. I know that Phil Brock is familiar with the article. I'm not sure if any other people.
Brought it to our attention.
Oh, okay, perfectly fine. Anyway, I want to bring to your attention one of the things that we haven't discussed geographically is the fact that we're pretty isolated over here with the Civic Auditorium. We have City Hall, the municipal court building. We have to generate activity over here. We need an entertainment performance space. One of the things that has been overlooked is the fact that when I first moved out to Santa Monica in 1990, you had the Mayfair, which was being used for HBO comedy performance tapings. We had the Improv over here, which had its own TV show, was used for tapings. We have to look for ways of generating revenue. I don't think we have done any outreach, as far as I know, to the entertainment community. I don't know why we haven't done outreach to the entertainment community. We have major talent agencies over here that are funded by major private equity groups. I don't think anyone has approached them. I could be wrong, but I'm under the impression no one has approached them. There are many, many ways of generating funds to finance what we want to do over here. There are many, many ways of generating revenue to support what we want to do here. And I know that we're locked into the algorithms right now with the software that we have, but I think we have to expand way beyond the algorithms and think very creatively about, number one, how to finance what we want, and number two, how to generate revenue for what we want to do over here. And I don't find that in the software that we've been using today. So I'm just trying to encourage everyone to look way beyond the software that we've been using, to think more creatively, to think even more aggressively about what we want over here. And we have to realize that we have to pull people into this area. The court will not go away, City Hall will not go away, the public facility, the public safety facility won't go away. We have to bring people into this area. So there has to be a magnet of activity here, performance activity, and there are ways of creating revenue for what we want to do here. And we have to look into those ways of creating revenue and ways of creating financing to attain that revenue.
Thank you. Bruce Cameron, Jeremy Stutz, and Gary Zembo.
Bruce Cameron. Nina forgot to mention at our table we had a wonderful mix. Half the folks at the table were under a certain number. They were youth. So it was a wonderful interchange, hearing what the young have to say and what the OFs like me have to say. So it was great, just excellent. I want to pick up on a point that our maestro from the Santa Monica Orchestra had hit upon, and that was the concept of the community at large benefiting from this. In all of our land use planning, that's exactly the concept behind the public benefit option in the loose. That's what we've asked for in all of the major projects that have been mooted, and we're not getting it. One of the options that was in this funding options that we didn't really get a chance to look at because it was in a dotted box and not in the model, and that is the transfer of development rights. There's a project coming up next month at planning, and it's going to work its way through at 5th and Arizona. It's a modest project in many ways. Some folks are going to love it, some are going to hate it, and we're going to go through the wars because it's development, the evil D word. It has two options involved in it. One is an FAR of 3.75, but very thin, but it's very porous, but it's high. So folks are going to get all bent out of shape about it. And then the other option for it is a smaller building, more squat, pushed together, which aesthetically is not going to be as good. My suggestion is that we can transfer 80,000 square feet from a potential development here onto that site to get a better project. Now, it'll be controversial. I'm going to raise it. I'm probably going to lose. But I think it's really, really important to raise the point that the very few development projects that we have that we can transfer off of historic buildings, such as this beautiful structure we're in, to these newer ones, so the whole community benefits from that one new project. And you're right, it really is, it's a public benefit that the community can benefit from. Not whether a union can get 16 jobs or whatever as the so-called public benefit, but a real public benefit. So that wasn't in our model today, and hopefully at some point, you know, we'll actually get serious about looking at TDRs as a development tool that actually benefits the community. It's used in many parts across this country and in many other countries of the world as a tool for slow grocers. Santa Monica, I don't know what that definition means, but we're going to raise it and we'll see what happens, and it should be fun. That wasn't mentioned at all in the options that we're looking at. Second thing that I wanted to look at, and it's unclear to me in the model, is the tax credits. This building will generate, or has the potential to generate, if and when the city gets around to designating this as a historic landmark. It's underway?
2002.
City landmark.
City.
It's not on the National Register.
No.
If it's not on the National Register, it ain't eligible for tax credits. Tax credits is another piece that wasn't mentioned in this. That's going to be about $7 to $8 million on the federal side, at least the way I look at it. Now, when the details are worked out, the number may be a little more, maybe a little less. A second option on tax credits was the state of California was going to offer, they passed a bill, AB 1999, was in the last budget, passed 78-0. Thank God for Richard Bloom in the Assembly. Passed unanimously as a bill by Speaker Atkins. The governor vetoed it. So maybe we can bring that sucker back again, and maybe, you know, in a modified form, but that's another $7 or $8 million towards the capital cost that we're looking at. So just want to toss those couple of ideas out there. I love this process. This building is near and dear to my heart for over 30 years. My first night in Santa Monica back in the 70s, I saw a band playing here that I'd seen 3 days before in Sydney. We were kind of touring the world together. And it's the first place that I spent time in Santa Monica. And God, Jerry, I hope it's not the last. I hope we all live long enough to see this happen again. So thanks for the great, great work. Thanks.
Okay, Jeremy Stutz, Gary Zembo, and Mike Salazar.
Thank you, Bruce. I really appreciated those comments. Yeah, I was at the table with Bruce, and having great engaging discussion amongst different generations is always really powerful because we can actually talk to each other and figure out what we're actually both talking about instead of criticizing each other, as has been the course of a lot of public debate recently in the city. So trying to work through our disagreements and towards places where we do agree, things that we do agree on, has been really powerful in part of this experience at the table today. I really tried to approach this from what I think Santa Monica lacks and what it needs. I think the most important part of what I saw here was that Santa Monica needs a world-class performing arts center. And so I tried to put that at the focus of everything that we were trying to accomplish through the model. I was going for the nonprofit model through the software. I know others from my generation and other people at the table were like, let's go for the private model as it offers a little bit more stability for the city. Either way, we all agreed that we wanted collaboration with the community, that this needs to be a space that's both celebrated for those Broadway shows and for big symphony concerts or a touring company that comes through, but also with some sort of community benefit. We want to see that it integrates community programming for the region. So even if it is a touring Broadway show, that there needs to be like a workshop that they offer for performance in the community. Or maybe it's just that we've got a nonprofit agency that's bringing in that world-class talent that's also integrating local performing artists. So however it works out, I thought that was really important. It's important to develop resources for the advancement of the performing arts within Santa Monica. Right now we've got the Broad, I think we've got a building at SMC, and we've got the high schools. But I grew up in Houston, Texas. Now I'm a proud resident of Santa Monica, but we had a center called the Hobby Center for the Performing Arts, and it had 2 different theaters within it, a smaller theater and then a larger main theater where they do programming with a nonprofit called Theater Under the Stars, or TUTS. And what's really cool about them is that they work with performing arts schools and people who go to HSPVA, which is the high school for the performing and visual arts, and really try to move up a new generation of people taking up performing arts within the culture of the city. And I think that's really important. Ultimately, I'd love to see that happen out of this space, is some sort of really upward mobility for performing arts within Santa Monica and within Los Angeles. Come on, we've got so many people who want to be performing in this city and in this region, and if we can develop and be a shining star for that and move people up, we've got world-class talent at our fingertips. Let's celebrate that. One of the other agreements really that was made at the table was that there needs to be no office space unless it relates to performing arts, the performing arts complex itself. But we did, I actually agree that there should be an outdoor and indoor performance space, and the museums should be left to like Bergamot or downtown Santa Monica. This really needs to be the focus should be performing arts on this property. I'm particularly interested in walkability, especially with the connection to the Expo line. I chair a nonprofit called Rail LA, and we've been really looking at the Expo line and what it's going to do for this city. But right now, to get from the Expo line to here, you'd have to cross the highway, which is it's pretty grim if you're trying to cross over that highway to get here. It's very uncomfortable. You feel pretty nervous, and we need to activate that street front and make that an easier passageway for people to connect over and be able to arrive at this without using a car. I understand that the people are going to drive, but we want to encourage in every way possible bicycling and arriving via alternative means of transportation, whatever that may be. While we're talking about that, I love Bruce's point about development, that it's possible to get the benefits of development off at other sites and then have those reaped in the form of more open space here, or more of what we really want as a community on this site. But we need to support, not just shout anti-development comments at every developer that comes into town, and push for those developers to give their community benefit. We've seen the models now today about funding, how much money we can get out of a hotel. Well, the Miramar's working on some stuff. They're probably not going to like that I talk about this, but the Miramar's working on some big stuff right now where they're going to be proposing redeveloping their property. What if we slip in a huge requirement that a lot of that funding should go towards this? I mean, we have the right to control the conversation in the city of where that money goes. We are the citizens of Santa Monica, and we can control where this money goes from different parts of the city. So let's work on that. And really important to me, as coming back to walkability, is not to block off the front of the Civic Center as you're approaching down from Main. If you look right now and you're at the end of Main Street, where you're like coming out of Santa Monica Place, and you're looking down the street, what's beautiful is that the street is lined with 2 green bike lanes, and at the very end of it, we're here, right? It's gorgeous. I could see programming space in front of that, but keep that space open. That's really, really important. But currently when you walk from the street to here, you're kind of put on this curved path if you're staying on the sidewalk. The sidewalk isn't heading towards the building at all. You have to walk across 2 lanes of kind of in and out of a parking garage, or it's a public parking lot, right? But it's not a great walking experience. So looking at better ways to connect the Main Street to the front of the building is going to be really important, especially as it relates to AFM. I know that this AFM, AFM's involvement in the city was contingent on us getting the Civic Center right in the future. And we want to be able to host these big events and to have the people who come for AFM not feel like they, when they're on the promenade, have to take a car to leave the promenade and come here. It's so close. We need to make that walking experience really outstanding, traversing our city from the promenade to this location. The other thing that I really wanted to say was that we do have a severe housing shortage. And so we had a vigorous debate at our table about whether more housing and developing housing is important. Affordable housing is such a big problem in Santa Monica. I'm one of the most lucky people that I live in this city, but people of my generation commute from in and out of the city, and it causes terrific traffic every day for everyone here because everyone comes to the jobs, and we don't have enough housing to support the jobs that we have here, and especially at the rates to be able to give to the people who actually work here. So I would love to see more of that. There were concerns as we brought that up, that was a need for the community on the site, about that noise and complaints about that would really affect the viability of this as a world-class performing arts space. So I don't think that conversation received resolution, but I thought it was very important and something we should be keeping in the back of our minds. I really want to thank you for letting me and everyone else who is in the room today come and speak and be heard about this important step forward for our city. Thank you.
Gary Zembo, Mike Salazar, and Tom Clays.
We're very lucky to live in a very wonderful city and a smart city. The people here are amazing. I'm going to be a little bit of a pie-in-the-sky person plus a little bit of a party pooper. First of all, let's all realize whatever we're talking about today will not open until 2020. If you want to wrap your mind around that, it's a long way. I've been to so many of these things over the 21 years that I've lived in Santa Monica, and you just have to be ready to wait. So, in that sense, let's go to the auditorium's operations itself. Nederlander, when everybody's banking on that, but when they made their first proposal, it was because they thought that the community redevelopment was going to pay for everything. So yes, we have a starting point of the discussion, but on the other hand, it's really, really wishful thinking that we're going to get them in the way that we're expecting. So I hope we can keep that reality in mind. I want to suggest something pie in the sky, which would be the potential of a sponsorship by a green energy tech community for this entire development, that this development may never have to be attached to the grid at all. So just like we are always proud to point out the Ferris wheel is solar powered and people are always very impressed by that, it's time we had something else to brag about, and perhaps City Hall, perhaps the police station and so forth could eventually all be powered by a company that uses our sunshine and our wind power to show that that's where the future of Santa Monica is going to be. The icing on the cake for Pie in the Sky that we discussed was this was a bungalow community when it was first founded. This was the air conditioning for everyone else in Los Angeles. Come here from Friday night till Sunday morning during the summer and you might survive, and that's why you have all the tiny bungalows. And they're disappearing. So this would be a great development to collect any bungalow that somebody's requesting demolition of and move it here to become part of those small offices, those small shops, those small restaurants. We need to save that history. So to pay for all of this, the last suggestion is, Philip explained that the city doesn't allow corporate naming on big office buildings, and we like that, generally speaking. But we can perhaps find a way for the deep pockets of all the companies that want to be in Santa Monica by getting a company that wants to put their name on the auditorium and have their corporate headquarters right next door. So we kind of get to take the advantage of both of those things. We have to pay the piper. There's no way around it, no matter how many lovely things, I'll contribute to a bungalow being moved here, but can't afford to pay for the rest of it. So these are just some of the ideas. And last was also, while Nederlander might not be so quick to come here, perhaps we could create our own nonprofit success story like Newman's Own. Paul Newman's named company that makes millions, but it's a nonprofit. It gives the money it makes away to other things in the community. Maybe we can do that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Mike Salazar, Tom Clays, and Ann Thanawala.
First, I want to say thank you to the city staff and to HRNA and of course, especially to all of you for really, now we feel there's some momentum here going, and we're going in a good direction. So I want to say thank you. Most of my comments are about the trade-off, the software, the idea. One of the things that I've found is that there were some, what I would see as artificial options of pick one of this, and you couldn't pick any more. You could pick 1 or 3 or 5. And I think, understandably, it has to be limited at some point, but there were a lot of things that we would have wanted to pick more of the 1s and maybe 2 of the 5 kind of thing. Another thing that really scared me is that I was really did not want to pick one of the options that was 5 floors. And the concern that I have about that, and hopefully this won't be the case, is that it won't be looked at if people pick 65 housing units or the larger office that it's being taken as we want 5 floors or we want 6 floors or 4 to 5 floors. Because I think right now the zoning is going through amendment, and there's big concern about some of the areas here that have been that were considered at one point to be 5 stories, and there's a suitability that really comes into question. So if that should be something clarified. There were also no wild card options. Somebody mentioned before about undergrounding, which I think is a really important thing. Even though I know we've got the big sewer lines, but that there's still some options there. The other option would be rooftops, and possibly looking at if we have, if we need more open space, whether it's a play field or sports field, looking at a connection to the high school and the possibility of even bridging over 4th Street, and then using rooftops of what we're creating on this parcel to hopefully create more open space here. The other concern was, and I found out in pushing the limits of the square footage, is that you could actually raise that above the 4.4 acres, but I think that's the concern I had initially going into this, is that there was no, there should have been, I thought, a direction for people not to worry about just getting up to that level, but that they could go over it, because just as they could go under it. And I went slightly over it, and I think it's important at this phase to let people know that they can exceed that, because we're just in this phase. Let's see, I talked about the heights. Okay. Something that was said early on also about the expo line, and the fact that it came up at our table is that I came up with an alarming 1,700 parking spaces. And the thought that we could get daytime parking credits for some of the uses, and then also if we could look at ways that we can take more advantage of Expo, and either through indirect or directly requiring some participation in Expo for activities that happen here. So I just want to say I'm looking forward to seeing what the results of this, but also looking forward to busting out of the trade-off mode and really getting into, looking at, the connectivity to Main Street and to Pico and the feel and the excitement that this will create. So I just want to say thank you.
Tom Clays and Ann Thanawala.
Hello.
My comments, I'm kind of coming to this from a little bit of background in finance. That's what I do for a living, and involved with real estate finance. And I've also been the treasurer in the Santa Monica Conservancy since its founding, so I kind of have that background. And I also want to look at it from a preservation standpoint. I found it interesting, a lot of people were saying that the Civic doesn't have to pay for itself. But at the same time, we're all talking about bonds, fundraising. So I think the beauty of this model that you guys have come up with is it's making us think about that other aspect. We can all dream about what we want, but if it's really going to happen, if this building isn't going to sit in mothballs for another 20 years, it's got to financially work. So I really laud everybody here. I laud the working group here, the staff, and the consultants. This is just an amazing process, and I thank you guys for it, because if it's going to work, it's going to have to get financed. And, we're not saying it's got to pay for itself, but it really does. So then the other thing I want to comment on is the type of performing arts venue. And I hear everybody talking about, we want to do the symphony, we want to do this, we don't want it private, we do want it private. I think we've got to also think about this in the context of the community we're in. This venue likely is going to get supported not just by citizens of Santa Monica, but citizens of the region. And I think we really got to look at it that way. A lot of the uses can be just Santa Monica uses, but we also have to reach out and realize that to make this thing viable, it's got to be a regional type use. And as a result, you got to recognize that the Broad is there, that the new Performing Arts Center in Beverly Hills is there. And we got to look at, what private venues, what is the demand drivers in this area. So it's a context that I think we got to take into account. So when I heard people saying, no, we don't want it private, we want it public, it seems to me there's got to be a mix of both to make this thing viable. So, and the other thing about this model, I hear people saying, well, it's not flexible, it's not this, but what the model has done is introduce the idea that we got to pay for it. And it's giving us optionality here. And yes, the final solution may not fit in all the boxes of this model, but it's really helping us think this through, and as a community recognize what's going on here, and that then as a community we can support something that's necessarily going to have compromises. There may be a little bit of density here. We may need to, somebody suggested, let the Miramar go forward, but strip some of the cash off the Miramar project. All kinds of compromises if we want something to happen here. And at the end, I think everybody's talking about fundraising, and somebody at my table is saying, well, we got to get money from Geffen. If you look at fundraising campaigns, and let's use Disney Hall as an example. I'm not an expert, but I seem to remember Disney Hall cost something like $350 million. I think the Walt Disney family gave either 75 or 100, something like that. Again, very large sum, but for that scale of project, it wasn't all the money. It's not like we're going to find a white knight that's going to 100% pay for everything here. So, Wallace Annenberg, when she gave the money for the community beach house here, that was $30 million. And I think what she gave was on that order for the Beverly Hills Performing Arts Center. So we're talking about a project, everything that I've seen is $100 to $130, $40 million. So, as we look through how this is going to get paid for, fundraising and a white knight and somebody to put their name on a building is a piece of it, but we've got to really realistically look at all kinds of other sources of revenue. And then the final thing, two things, is there once was, before the Civic, a residential community here that is gone now. And I think maybe the cart's before the horse a little bit on this, but I think there's got to be some kind of acknowledgement in whatever we do to give deference to that community that is now gone. And then finally, people are talking about the Civic, once it gets activated again, we all don't like traffic, we all don't like density, a lot of people don't want change from how it is now, but it's gonna change. There's gonna be more traffic, possibly more density, And that's the compromise we have to make if we want this venue to work. So thanks a lot.
Anne?
Hi, and I want to say thank you to the Civic Working Group for all the efforts that you guys have been putting in. I know how much time and energy this is going to take moving forward and all the time you've already put in, so I really appreciate it. I'll try to get this thing going. You know, the back and forth of what this should be, I really like the idea of a International Performing Arts Center, and I don't just say national because we do get a lot of people from everywhere, and we have a lot of residents from everywhere. That being said, I think there are some options that can really, if you go forward with that idea, written into the contract, would be options for residential preference, for maybe ticket sales, residential preference, whereby the contract is written that the community has an option, maybe it's 1 week a quarter or 10 days a quarter, to operate out of the venue. Another option, obviously, you know, the funding issue is a huge one. And we all know that there's a huge amount of people in this community, I think it's over 50%, who are somehow involved in the arts. Maybe it's 70%. I don't know if anybody knows that number right offhand. That being said, it seems to me that that's really an integral infrastructure community. And when we talk about infrastructure and in water and electric and all of these other things, there's also a human infrastructure. And when we talk about that and we talk about funding it, that's part of the infrastructure. And I'm talking about that being something that closes the gap, where we had a $253 million surplus this year. So if it's $1 million or $1.5 million or $2 million, we're talking about a community infrastructure. Maybe that gap can be closed through our general fund. As far as today, sorry, I don't know if this, okay, there we go. The couple of issues I had with the way these things worked on the iPad, and one was when you look at the details section of the choices, they need to include, they didn't include the capital investment. I understand that that can't be changed now, but it makes it, I think, hard for the community at large to deal with that issue if they're going online and they're trying to use this function. I'm told they have to look elsewhere to find out where that capital investment information is on each option. And now it just gives the cumulative at the bottom. So it kind of makes it a little wondering where that goes. The other issue is the online offerings of comps, which we don't see any of that today, where those comps came from. And I'm a person who kind of likes to dig a little deeply and find out where things, to understand better where those numbers came from. So I was hoping that at some point we'd be able to see where those comps came from, not just from a general perspective, but in a more specific way. The other issue is integration of programming options of the choices, which I know a lot of other people had said today. We look at some of the choices and say, well, I'd like a little bit of that in there and a little bit of that. Or we could do more programming than what was listed there. Could take some of this and take some of that and put it together and make something else with it. I'm a big proponent of looking for corporate sponsorships. I think that that's quite doable. It's being done all the time. It has been for years. You look at the museums around the country now, and there's more and more corporate sponsorships coming through, as well as private. And I think the outreach should happen first from a private perspective, whether that means getting it out in the papers or some other way to find out if someone would be willing to step up and put some money on this. And that's it today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our public hearing. And I wanted to thank our consultants and our staff once again, because an amazing amount of work went into making this all happen. I hope you all come back tomorrow, bring your friends, talk to them tonight and give them the rundown of what they missed so they're prepared. Go online and do your homework and fool around and come up with all kinds of different plans that you can bring back with you. We'll be going over the preliminary ideas that everyone plugged in today. If you can't come back, or if you talk to people who can't come, starting Monday, they'll be able to go to our Civic Working Group website at www.santamonicacivic.org and find the link to submitting their ideas through this software online. And always our library of research and information of all things civic are available on that website, and I encourage you all to thumb through it all. Can I finish? The Civic Working Group meets on the fourth Monday of the month at 6:30 right here in the Civic Auditorium. And basically what we're doing is conducting research, or asking our consultants and staff to conduct the research, and analyzing it and giving feedback on how we want it presented for these workshops. That's basically what we're doing. We're not figuring out the whole plan and designing it there. We're working on how to present all of this great information for you guys. The next and final community meeting, where we bring it all together and add nuanced comments that will inform the Civic Working Group when we make our final recommendations to council, will be on March 21st. And I guess that concludes our workshop. I think Phil has one comment before we adjourn.
That we adjourn.
Oh, that is it. Is there, and there's a second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you.